This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1013 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings, thanks for tuning in. I've teamed up with DraftKings to kick off Week 1. Head over to DraftKings, deposit $5, and get rewarded with one DFS ticket for Week 1. And play free for your shot at a share of millions. The ticket reward amount varies and is based on deposit, but make sure you sign up with promo code LATEROUND today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369 in New York. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Minimum $5 deposit required. Ticket rewards are site credits only, valid for use on eligible DFS contests. Ticket rewards are single use and expire 9/8/25 at 8:20 p.m. Eastern. See terms at DraftKings.com/promotions. Sponsored by DraftKings. Through the years, there's been one consistent piece of feedback with this sleeper show. I talk about way too many deep sleepers. In the past, I've looked at players rostered in 10 to 50% of Yahoo leagues. And then I've looked at another bucket of players under the 10% mark. And that's too low of a threshold. So this season, I'm changing it up. I'm going to be looking at players rostered in 50 to 80% of Yahoo leagues as one bucket. Talking through some guys that I generally like more than the market that week. Then I'll dig into players that are rostered in that 20% to 50% range. And then from there, I'll find players who are rostered in fewer than 20% of leagues who you may want to consider starting. And I'm not going to come at you with just loads and loads of players. I want to be as thoughtful as I can with the players that I'm picking, so we're looking at like 5 to 7 players per tier. Some weeks last year, that number was closer to 10 to 12. When I mention names on this show, I'm not saying start them no matter what, just for the record. I'm simply giving you options. Some of you may be in a pinch and you may need some help off the waiver wire. Others may be looking to gather some information on matchups. Whatever the case may be, know that the sleepers on this show, they're sleepers for a reason. Teams in your league don't have them rostered. They're not the best fantasy football assets in the world. Now, I'll do my best to give you context for where I have these guys ranked. But if you're ever curious about precisely where I have them ranked, you can always check out the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon. I'm posting weekly rankings over there for the insider tier. With all that out of the way, let's look at Week 1 sleepers. Now, as I said, this first group of sleepers consists of players rostered in 50 to 80% of Yahoo leagues. And we'll kick things off with the only quarterback that I have in this group, and that's Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence hopefully got upgrades across the board this season. There's Travis Hunter, who sounds like he's going to play more offense than defense to start the year. There's an improved backfield. They have Bashaw Tutin now. And most importantly, Liam Cohen is coaching this team. We just watched Cohen lead the Buccaneers to one of the best offenses in football. And Baker Mayfield had a career year. And part of that career year was Baker Mayfield getting it done more on the ground with his legs. And that's what I'm really eager to see with Lawrence. T-Law actually has used his mobility quite a bit throughout his career. He's never finished a season with fewer than 2.7 rushing points per game. That's way higher than where Baker was at prior to last year. And Baker finished the season last year with 3.3 points per game via the rush. The Jags get the Panthers this week in a game that has a solid 46.5 point total. That gives Jacksonville the 6th highest team total on the slate. And Carolina, according to PFF, is entering the season with the 3rd worst secondary in football. Lawrence is a great play, and you should be using him over players who are drafted over him like Justin Fields and Caleb Williams. I think he's a fringe top 10 quarterback this week. Now, in that same game is Tank Bigsby, who's rostered in 80% of leagues at the time of this recording. I do still prefer Travis Etienne to Tank Bigsby this week, because I'm not sure the pass catching is on Bigsby's side. But Carolina is coming off a season where they were by far the worst team at stopping running backs in fantasy football. And Bigsby still projects to see the most work on the ground in that offense. And like I said, that offense could score a lot of points. It's a game that could be higher scoring. So you can look his way if you need someone in the flex. Now, one player who I have ranked below Bigsby, but could be a cheap option if you're in a deeper league, is Javonte Williams. Now, the matchup against Philly, it's not a great matchup, but the Cowboys are pretty big underdogs. And Williams, at least early on in the season, is more than likely going to play the hurry-up role in that Dallas offense. Not only did he see a solid 12.8% target share last year in Sean Payton's offense, but the Broncos used Williams on 61% of their long down and distance snaps according to Fantasy Life data. That was by far the most on the team. So there's definitely a scenario here where Javonte Williams sees the most work on the ground for Dallas. That's what we're projecting. And then all the while, he'll see by far the most snaps due to a possible negative game script hitting. And if that happens, he can come away with flex-worthy numbers, even in a tough matchup. Now at wide receiver, Josh Downs. Miami's secondary has a chance to be really bad this year. And in the slot this week, they're going to be playing Jason Marshall Jr. He's a rookie 5th-round pick out of Florida. Downs is coming off a year where he saw a target on 29% of his routes run. Among 100-plus target wide receivers last year, only Malik Neighbors and Puka Nacua could match that number. I think Downs could have a really big game. Now, I don't have a tight end in this tier this week, so the last player I want to talk about is Darnell Mooney. As I said in the 15 Transactions episode earlier this week, Mooney was one of the best deep ball receivers in football last year. Only Justin Jefferson and Cortland Sutton had more 15-plus air yard receptions. Only Jefferson, George Pickens, and DK Metcalf, according to PFF, had more 20-yard receptions. That pairs really well with Michael Penix, who finished last season with the second highest average depth of target among quarterbacks, among qualified quarterbacks. And the Falcons get a Tampa Bay secondary this week that ranks as a below average one entering the season, according to PFF. That game also has one of the higher totals on this slate. It could be high scoring. So if Mooney's able to go, he's been recovering from that shoulder injury, I'm cool with him as like a wide receiver 4, maybe even a wide receiver 3 type. Next, we're looking at players rostered in 20% to 50% of Yahoo leagues, and we'll start at quarterback with Bryce Young. Now, I already mentioned that the Jags and Panthers game could be higher scoring, and Bryce Young is obviously going to be part of that. But also, like I talked about earlier in the week, Young was actually not bad when he returned from the bench last season. Over his final 10 games post-benching, he averaged 18 standard fantasy points per game while averaging 5 points per game via rushing. With Teteroa McMillan now in the mix at wide receiver, Young has a real shot to be fantasy viable, especially in a good game environment like this one. I'd be fine playing Bryce Young over the quarterbacks in that Chicago-Minnesota game, and I think he's in the same tier as someone like Justin Herbert. Michael Penix is the other quarterback to shout out here. Now, I like Bryce Young more, but like I said with Darnell Mooney, the Falcons' passing attack has a plus matchup in what should be a higher scoring game against the Buccaneers. Penix may not bring a ton of juice with his legs, but as long as Mooney is back and healthy, he's got a shot to post some big passing numbers. Last year, the Bucs had one of the highest adjusted passing yards per game allowed in all of football. Now at running back, you could look at the Cleveland backfield. Of the two, Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson, this week, I do prefer Ford. The Browns get a great matchup against the Bengals, and Ford, like I said on yesterday's 10 Trends episode, he's the veteran presence in that backfield with the most 2-minute and long down and distance snaps for Cleveland last year by far. The Browns are big underdogs. I'm expecting a decent bit more Ford than Sampson in week 1. He could bring some PPR upside. Ollie Gordon's the other guy to call out in this tier. Devon Achane, he's going to get his, but he's also coming off that calf injury. He's also never been like an 80% running back rush share player. He was at a sub 60% running back rush share last year. There's plenty of work to be had for Ollie Gordon, and he could have a decent day against this Colts defense. Christian Kirk is going to be playing a lot in the slot this year, and my guess is that he starts the year out playing in 2 wide receiver sets, as long as he's healthy. And that's just given the inexperience that the Texans have at wide receiver. I'm a little bit worried about how this Texans offensive line is going to hold up just in general, but definitely this week against the Rams. The Rams last year were able to generate pressure at the 10th highest rate in football. That could result in some easier lower A-dot looks from CJ Stroud to Christian Kirk. That would really benefit Kirk out of the slot. And with him likely running more routes than he will later in the season as some of these rookies develop, now might be the time to use him. Cedric Tillman's also pretty interesting this week. The Browns should see that negative game script like I talked about against Cincinnati, but even if they don't, the Bengals are entering the season with a bottom 10 secondary according to PFF. Tillman last season was averaging a 22% target share per game rate during the month before his season-ending injury. If that type of share continues with Joe Flacco, then Tillman could be in store for a really great week. And then at tight end, Chigakonkwo. As I've been saying, he had a wild route participation rate with Cam Ward in the preseason, and there's no obvious number 2 option in Tennessee. Denver, who they face this week, they have a great defense, and Calvin Ridley could be occupied by Patrick Surtain. If a negative game script hits for Tennessee, Okonkwo could be one of the players in that offense who benefits most. We're now on to players rostered in fewer than 20% of Yahoo leagues, and look, if you have to start one of these guys in week 1, then you're either in a super deep league or you had a super bad draft. Regardless, I have some options for you. Joe Flacco. If I'm talking about Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson and Cedric Tillman, I should probably mention Flacco too, right? The Bengals surrendered bottom 10 numbers to quarterbacks last year when adjusted for strength of opponent. And Flacco, the last time he was in Cleveland, he gave us 5 top 15 performances and 5 regular season starts. The Browns will have to keep pace with this Bengals offense. And passing volume is the way that's going to have to happen. That makes Flacco a low-end QB2 option. Now, I've got Danny Dimes ranked below Flacco, but I don't totally despise him either. Because like I said, the Dolphins have problems in their secondary, and Indianapolis has weapons all over that offense. And sportsbooks are recognizing this too. The Colts actually have the 12th best implied team total on this week's slate. Dimes, as we know, can bring a little something extra with his legs too. So I think he's most definitely in streaming territory here in week 1. Now, my lone running back in this tier is Chris Rodriguez. The Giants aren't necessarily an ideal matchup, but with Bill Krosky-Merritt being a first-year player, it's hard to envision him having this massive workload in week 1. The Commanders have come out and they talked about Rodriguez being their short yardage and goal line guy. And if they do hit a positive game script, which is very possible because they're 6-point favorites, then Rodriguez could benefit. And Washington has the 3rd best implied team total on this week's slate. We're going to go back to that Jacksonville-Carolina game with this next one and shout out Xavier Legette. I mentioned on the 15 Transactions episode how I don't personally think Legette is the answer for Carolina, the number 1 obvious answer. But I've been wrong plenty in the past, and I still think he's capable of a 20% target share. He'll play full-time snaps, and his route share should be really strong. So I'm willing to throw him out there as an option within this game that I think could be high scoring. Demario Douglas has basically been New England's best wide receiver over his 2 years in the league. That might not be saying much, but he was barely second on the team in yards per route run as a rookie at 1.70. In that season as a rookie, he had a targets per route run rate of 0.24. Last year, his numbers fell, but both of those numbers for Demario Douglas were best on the team. I'm interested to see how fast-paced his opponent this week, Vegas, plays on offense with Chip Kelly. If Kelly runs the offense at the pace that he did the last time he was in the NFL, it's going to allow opposing offenses to also run more plays. Now, that might not happen, but it's a nice upside piece for this plus matchup for New England. Vegas has PFF's worst secondary entering this season. And then one more wide receiver to call out here, Olamide Zaccheaus. Luther Burden got a slow start to camp with an injury, and it allowed Olamide Zaccheaus to sort of carve out a slot role in that Bears offense. My guess is that he's going to be the primary slot guy against Minnesota. And with Minnesota's front, I think Caleb Williams might be looking for those quick outlet throws. That's going to help Zaccheaus. He's a deeper sleeper for sure, but I think he could be a nice PPR option. And then I'll go with one tight end in this tier, and that's Cade Otton. Last year, only Trey McBride had a higher route participation rate at tight end across the league than Cade Otton did. We saw Otton come through with some big games when the wide receivers were banged up for Tampa Bay last year. And right now, we're looking at just Mike Evans and rookie Emeka Egbuka. Those are the only guys who are locked-in target getters. So Otton, in a game where Tampa Bay has a shot to score a lot of points against Atlanta, he makes a lot of sense. Now, at the end of these episodes, I'm going to throw out some streaming defenses that you can look at off the waiver wire. And I'll keep it quick because that's the point of these episodes. Arizona was a 15 Transactions defense this week because they're near touchdown road favorites against Spencer Rattler and the Saints. Washington works as well against Russell Wilson and the Giants. Russ played just 11 games last year. He still finished in the top 15 in sacks taken. And speaking of sacks, The Rams could have their way with that Houston offensive line this week. I mentioned that with Christian Kirk, but I love the Rams as sort of a sneaky streamer. And then New England could work too. That game against Vegas is a 43.5 point total, and the Raiders have a bottom 10 implied total on this week's slate. So those are the 4 choices this week: the Cardinals, Commanders, Rams, and Patriots, in that order. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Enjoy football tonight, everyone. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow with a new mailbag episode and a new episode of Late Round Perspectives.